Unmute sketch. Well, good afternoon, everyone. Welcome to the Dream Labs. This is Dr. Contrast live. And before I begin here, we've got some exciting news. I've just noticed that Shadow's put it up on the chat system here. This will be our last presentation on Twitch, which I regret deeply. I've been tremendously inspired and most appreciative of the people who followed me on Twitch. I hope so. Please convert over. We'll be going live every week now on YouTube only. So I much appreciate, for example, if you just switch over from, if you want to follow me on Twitch, please move over to YouTube. We'll go live every week. We'll have the same kind of program content. We'll change gears and do some different things, but we just felt necessary to kind of simplify the whole process and get it down to one system, and much more easier to manage. But again, it's kind of a bittersweet day for me in a way, because I really, for the last 2 years, I've been really involved in doing, with the Shadow's help, getting into the Twitch system, and it's been very good. I've learned an awful lot. Still have an awful lot to learn, but really have enjoyed the process going through Twitch, and it's really kind of a bittersweet day in a sense. But I think that the programming going over to YouTube is going to be much stronger. It's much more direct. We'll be doing some very interesting things. Today, we're going to wrap up just a little bit of a process piece on just perspective. And I don't want to get to the place. This is one thing I want to really guard against as we go week to week to week to week. This stuff, perspective, can be extremely intimidating, and I do not want to project that in any way, shape, or form. There's an easy way to get there, and I think I'm grateful for the days that I spent in school during my collegiate years with Sid Mead. The man was an absolute genius. He explained things in terms of being extremely simple, but at the same time, the dynamic output was overwhelming, and it took all the pressure of trying to be correct and precise in everything we sketch rendered with. And I think the thing you'll see here today, as we did 2 weeks ago, or a week ago rather, with 1 point perspective, there's a process to it all. There's a fundamental key system to it all. There are certain terms we have to be recognized with, but I think the most important part of the whole process with perspective is understand this, and I mean this sincerely from the bottom of my heart. The most important thing about perspective is to allow the volume to do the work for you. Don't draw the object, draw the volume. What does it sit in? What's the scale? What's the idea behind it all? What's the measuring system? And as we said too last week, the measuring system we're working with is a basic cube. That becomes a standard bearer for all things done in perspective. And again, Sid Mead's comment, and I'll say this from the very beginning, I'll wrap it up at the end as well. He made a comment that'll live in infamy. That great perspective is the genesis of illustration. There's no question that when you understand perspective and how to utilize it and how it functions, your illustration and drawing technique will improve dramatically. So that's the reason for the second phase here, getting into the dynamic perspectives program and the process today. I'll just show you, again, going back and review a few things, but we're going to go to a 2-point perspective system. And I just want to highlight some things here on the screen. This is a basic working page here. We're going to utilize just to kind of get it started here with the whole idea. And remember, the whole process and the purpose of this stream today is to underscore the importance of understanding how volume dictates scale, which dictates product, no matter what it is. If it's automobile, interior space, architecture, product design. If we have a scale system, you know where you are at all times, it's a whole lot better than guessing where you are. And I think that's what I want to get across here today, without intimidating people about, gee, you have to do this, you have to do this, do this. There's a lot of moving parts, but I'm going to reduce it down to a very simple 3-step process, and it's going like this. Number 1, we're going to work just like I do every time I draw something. We're going to see through. Number 2, we're going to draw through. And the last phase is to follow through, and we'll see how that operates in a moment here. Now, I'll put this little sketch piece together here. This is a basic setup here with horizon line and some of the terminology laid out in it, for example, in this case here. That's a basic building block of the cube. You can't get past that in terms of getting scale and proper and perspective correct. Once that scale is set, you can carve into it and begin to develop the shape out of that. So there's a little thumbnail sketch here. And move over to this one. Notice how you begin to look at this idea. There's the initial, the first cube here is the initial drawing, but there's an element called the special vanishing point, which is incredibly powerful, because once you find that special vanishing point, you can build 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 different steps back in space. And I'll show you that in a few moments in the drawing process, how that all begins to develop. But again, notice there's another element that's interesting for those of us who are really perceptively minded here, and that is in 2-point perspective. Notice you'll find out by definition, 2-point perspective is when the object or objects you're looking at are at an angle to your eyes. In other words, in 1-point perspective, that object is parallel to your eyes. In 2-point perspective, you've just rotated it. And notice what happens here. Every one of these little thumbnail sketches, you can find out if it's a 1 or 2-point perspective by looking at the ground plane. Notice angle, 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 angle. Everything just shifts a little bit on the picture plane, and it becomes a matter of having a very good, solid understanding of where, even if it's as subtle as this vehicle sketch here, how subtle that line is. There's parallel to ground, but the minute you drive that line back at an angle, that all of a sudden it changes from 1-point to a 2-point perspective. So those are the things you're looking for. And the more you move up, for example, the higher eye level, the more dramatic you're going to see in terms of shape. For example, this is a good example of that one. There's another example of that one. This little watch study is an example of that. And the point I'm trying to make here with this very simple, non-intimidating approach to perspective is simply this. What's really neat about the whole idea here is that once it's all said and done, the whole point is that you'll have a set of circumstances and understanding of where you are in space to really begin to move at this thing and make a real solid statement in your sketches. No need to repeat, no need to go back and redo. Let the thumbnail go and just develop and develop, develop as you go here. So that's the introductory piece. So I just wanted to brief you on how the fundamental, what the basic process is. Now let's go to phase 2 here. Now the next phase is just how it all begins to function. I put this page together to kind of illustrate some of the language structure. Again, I don't want to belabor the point here, but we don't see this in publication very often. That's number one. This red line is called the leading edge. That leads you into perspective. That leads the view. This frame here, for example, and this frame left, frame right, that sets up the frame of the view. Second thing is we call those drive lines. They'll drive you right back to perspective. So the language is important when you develop some of this material, because it really helps to kind of put it all together. But the most important part of this whole process is, and this is Da Vinci's genius. If you look at this little thumbnail sketch here, and I've highlighted it in another sketch coming up here, when you come down the ground plane, this angle right here is at 90 degrees in perspective. Now, notice, a lot of people get confused with this because they look at that vertical piece and that angle. That's a vertical. That's standing upright. This is down on the ground plane. That whole quadrant right there is on the ground plane. So therefore, the nearest angle to us where we're standing is on the ground plane at 90 degrees in perspective. Now, the next step is you bisect that at 45 degrees and then split it 15, 30, 45. You take that first 15 and run it right back to horizon line. That gives you one of the most unique tricks in the ideation study of putting together concept sketches, no matter what the discipline is. That will give you the right of getting the right scale down, come back to vanishing point, drive that line through, and then you get the other side, and it becomes a very visually accurate cube. Notice, once again, visually accurate. Not mathematically accurate. When you use mathematics, what happens is, on the mathematical side, it depends on monocular vision. It's just one eye looking at the system. And if you ever tried to measure a cube you've drawn by using a ruler, it never looks like a cube. It's more rectangular because the monocular vision distorts it. This is a process by introducing the Da Vinci system. He was using binocular vision, which opens up the picture plane and puts proportion properly in perspective and really guarantees the fact that a visual cube looks like a visual cube. So the next step is, once you have that set up, then you begin to drive through, etc., and begin to finish the cube here. And I'll show you that by drawing a demonstration in just a few moments here. Here's another variation down below, just to kind of simplify. This is where all the language is. Same process. So you get the horizon line down. And I think it's important to note, too, no matter if you're an illustrator, whether you're doing figure work, product design, architecture, interior space, again, the disciplines, get those vanishing points out there. Now, when I draw things, when I go through illustration or sketch rendering skills, I have a bad habit, and I've learned early in my career to get those vanishing points off the paper, and you visualize where those vanishing points are. If you keep it on the paper, sometimes the view gets very restricted, and it becomes distorted. So I strongly recommend you take that thing all the way through and open it up and take the chance of learning how to, and I'll show you a couple of tricks here about getting strike lines down accurately so they don't distort the view you're looking at. So here again, horizon line down. This is the leading edge. You come right in and notice that one thing that's never discussed, it always amazes me when I put workshops and clinics on, I'm always stunned by the fact that one of the biggest questions I get is, does 2-point perspective have a central vanishing point? Yeah, it does. That's where you're standing. But it's never publicized. It's never discussed. It's very, very rare to hear that. And I think that's critical because that's where you're standing, and you drive it up to horizon line. That's where you're standing. That's where your eyes are on that picture plane and on the horizon line. This is the leading edge that leads you into perspective. So once you set that height up, another thing that's interesting too, that height is swung down on the ground plane, this area here, that line, and I've got it labeled labor, later is called a measuring line. You take that measuring line, you swing that line down, get to here, and drive that right back to central vanishing point, where it intersects right there. That's the first face. You've now just developed the right-hand side of the face of a cube visually. How do you get to the rest of it? You take that same point, drive it right back to vanishing point left, where it intersects, drive that line through again to hit on the other side on the left-hand side, take that intersection and run it vertically. There you go, voila. A visually accurate and very simple three-step stages of developing a two-point cube. I've got a question. Antares, bisect the corner of the ground plane, take yep, there it is, you've got it. I mean, that little process right there, Antares, is golden, because once you understand that, here's the key to it all. Once that's understood and begin to work with that as a proportional piece, when I know you do a lot of transportation design, once that's set up, if the wheelbase is what, let's say 115 and the width is 60, you now have a proportion to work with. And what helps you do, that special vanishing point has a magical little side trick to it. Once you understand that, you can cheat perspective and flatter it to make it still more and more accurate by being visually dynamic. So that's the key behind all this. And I think the real presentation for me today in this little special thing about getting into the process of dynamic perspective in part 3 and 2-point perspective is to not show you how to do a cube on the process, but to show you what the product is like. And once you understand it, believe me, folks, you can just cheat like mad. And I don't mean that to be detrimental. Cheating means understanding the principles and then taking advantage of those principles and making it more powerful. So let's move along here. That's the setup here. Now, back to this. This is how I show how this works. Notice, again, same principle. There's a lot of line work in here, but I brought this piece together because I think it's important to show you, again, horizon line down. Again, your leading edge, central vanishing point, coming back in, setting the frames up above eye level a little bit, and then you take that same point right back to, and here's your measuring line. You bring that line right down and swing it over, take that point right back to central vanishing point. On the ground plane where it intersects, drive that through. That sets up, in this case, that'll set up the whole left-hand side of this cube. Very simple, but it's easy to, it sounds complex, but it's a very automatic process. A is to B is to C is to D. And remember, the whole premise is twofold. Number one, to learn how to understand perspective and use it as a tool to flatter shape and really over-dramatize or sell your forms. Secondly, to see through it, to draw through it, and then to follow through with it. And again, notice this is down below. Now you start building these cubes, for example. There's the initial cube is right here. That's the first one we developed using the same process. Now notice you go from there. Once you find that special vanishing point here to get that first cube done, back to the nearest corner, right back to SVP, intersection, draw through. SVP, draw through, SVP, draw. I mean, it just keeps building back. You can go on top of it and begin to build that proportion because all the keynotes are there. My point is, once you get that first key set down on the ground plane and that special vanishing point is found, that begins to repeat itself back in space ad infinitum. So it's an absolutely amazing process to work with. So let's move along here. That's a little bit of a mix. Now, here's a little exercise we did here, very briefly, a little 3-view drawing here of an actual object, plan view, side view, and front elevation. What it begins to look like, for example, in perspective. Notice this whole process right here is what we use as a building block process to get the shapes to work. That is basically it. So once you know that, you can then develop that form out of that shape by driving back and forth, using the angles and so forth that you set up. And again, this is from the front 3/4, looking at it from the front. This is from the rear, same process again. Notice how I've used the perspective to kind of build proportion and accuracy. And it comes together really freely because you're not forcing it. You understand where you are. And I said last week that I think one key thing that really always amazes me about perspective is you always know where you are. It's a knowledge factor. There's never a panic in terms of, oh, where do I go next? What's my next step? Step by step by step, by seeing through it, by drawing through it, and then following through with it, it opens the whole thing up and it becomes much more manageable. It takes all the pressure off of us because the perspective is doing the work for us. And as I said before last week, and I'll reinforce it again today, whenever I draw a very complicated form like an automobile or an aircraft or what I'm developing, I don't draw the actual vehicle or the car, automobile interior. I draw the volume. What's it sitting in? And then I begin to carve it out of there. That's what these exercises are intended to do, to show us how that's done. So let me stop there. Anybody any questions at all in terms of my going too quickly here? They're on to it. Nice to have you on board. Shackle, it's just very good to have you guys on board. Thank you so much for taking the time. And again, I don't want to lose sight of the fact that, again, this is our last day on Twitch. We're going to switch everything over to YouTube next week. So make sure you tell all your friends, please join us on YouTube. It's going to be much more streamlined, and I'm looking forward to it. So anybody, any questions so far? I hope I'm not going too quickly here, confusing the element that we're looking at here. So anybody? While you're doing that, I'll just kind of flip the page and go to the next page here, set them up here. Another little set of exercises going vertically and taking that same process. Notice how, look at the number of lines there to kind of set this sketch up. But it does become a situation where all those lines begin to tell us how to develop this shape and how to begin to develop out of it, how to begin to create it. And really looking forward to getting some good solid stuff here. How do you decide how far apart to set the left? And Terrace, that's a great question. The decision is simply this. What do you illustrate? If you're drawing a very tight view of an automobile, maybe you want to draw the VPs in a little bit. But I would love to see you get into the habit of taking, let's say it's 11 by 17, which this is. Take those vanishing points off the page and train your eyes and your hands and your shoulder motion to get those lines to go through. And I'll show you a little trick in a few moments about how to get those lines to set up. So I think the decision is yours. I think I would strongly recommend you take those vanishing points off the page and begin to open up that picture plane, because it takes the distortion out of it. That's the thing. When you move them in a little bit and you tighten down, it's going to get really keyholed, and it's going to look very odd. So here again, I hope that helps answer your question. Let me know if that's okay. So far so good. I mean, you open that up, that picture plane. Let me just drop this down a little bit, and you begin to see how all this thing works. Really interesting how it begins to develop again, because you're freeing up your mind and your hands and in the visual process to see things off the page. Plus, what that helps you do as well from the sketch rendering side is to see much more infinitely. You don't see it on the page, you see it off the page, and it begins to open up the drawing, which gives you more room to follow through with details, aspects of information, etc., that are very unique in terms of what the viewer might want to be asking about. Now, I'll say this too at this stage of the game. When I put on a presentation, for example, to a client, I've always had this bad habit, and I think it's a good one in a sense, but I don't want to have you all take it out of, hey, Doc, Emo, how are you? It's good to see you, Chief. Nice. How are things there in West Germany? Good to have you on board. The Shadow's here. I'm sure he's going to say hello too. So good to have you on board, Nemo. Great stuff.
He's actually coming in on YouTube.
It's okay. It's just based on your feeling what lens would suit. Yeah, and Terrace, that's exactly just based on your feeling of what lens would suit the subject. Absolutely. But again, no matter what the lens is, open that picture plane up and get those vanishing points off the page, making sure that you've got some really good security to work with here. So now let's take a look at this guy here. Again, same process again. Horizon, and I should say this too. Whenever I sketch something, for example, without all the mechanics going on, I see this stuff in my mind's eye. I mean, it's pictured right there. I'm not perfect with it. I'm still working with it. I don't memorize it, but it's part of the habit. It's part of the fabric of being creative, that you see these things working for you, and you don't have to draw them, so to speak, as much as we're showing you here. This is more of a process session today to show you where all these things come together and why they work in harmony to create newness and freshness in your sketches. So when you go through a drawing process, this is all resident in your mind. You begin to see that thing and activate it, whether it's 1 point, 2 point, etc., and go from there. So there it is, that little object standing vertically, then laying it down, for example, coming from behind, showing the same. No, it's the same scale as there. Here's my leading edge right here in red. There's the actual form itself, and 1, 2, 3 cubes back, which I showed you earlier. That's part of it as well. And again, notice down to this sketch here, there's my leading edge here. I come back to this measuring line, drop it down, take that back to BP, find out where the first cube is, and that first cube is right here. Let me just kind of ink this in. That first cube is right there, so I've got it already nailed down, right to a T. So last but not least, here it is. That's another little visual page about how to use the system here as we go. Now, the last one I'm going to spend a little bit of time with here is to show you what we're really talking about here. It's kind of a little more elaborate in terms of what's taking place here on the series of 2-point perspective and the process behind it all. Here it is again, horizon line. I've got my central vanishing point, or just leading edges here, and I found that measure line by doing this. I just take that, and if you have to, there's not an embarrassment at all. Make certain that when you take that leading edge, there it is, drop it down here in space, put it there, and take that point right back to central vanishing point, where it intersects right here. That's where you run the vertical up, and it shows you how to develop, in this case, the right-hand side of the cube. Now, to get to the other side, not a problem. Once you draw that through, let me just kind of recreate this. Once you recreate that, take that line right back to, so in this case, vanishing point left. Where it intersects, take that point right back to vanishing point right. Now we've just created a floor level here. That's the base. What I said about 5 or 10 minutes ago is really critical now. First thing I want to look at is this whole area in beige. That's the ground plane. Everything builds from there on up. So the next step you want to move to is, again, this is the inside cut line phenomenon. There is this angle right here is 90 degrees in perspective. That is 9 degrees in perspective on the ground plane. You take that angle, bisect it at 45 degrees visually, then take 15, 30, 45. Take that first 15 degree line right through that corner in SVP. Where that intersection takes place, draw it right back through to get your ground plane in, and you're on your way. Bring it up and so forth. So I'm going to finish the sketch and show you how that goes here. Now, let me stop here for a moment. Anybody, any questions at all? Good deal. So far, so good. I don't want to go too quickly. And again, as I said at the beginning of the stream, I do not want this to become an intimidation factor. I want to keep it down to a simple premise to make sure that these key things that we're dealing with begin to make sense for us as we go. So let me just move this a little bit here. Now, let's get this guy. Let's take this line right back to VP. There it is there. Now let's take this backside line, bring it up. There's my first cube right there. Let me just darken that in. Here's my first cube. That, to that, to that, and so on. There's number one. Now how am I going to build back on this thing? No problem. Closest to me, next line closest to me, next corner. Take that point right back to special vanishing point. Let's do this, and I'll change colors here. Let's take that point right back to SVP, to there. Let's pick up that point on the ground plane, drive that through. Intersection on this face, bring it vertically. Run that back in perspective. And again, run it vertically. And there it is. There's my second cube right there in blue. That to that, that, that. Now, add one more. Back to the nearest corner again, back to SVP. If I rotate this thing a bit. Find out where that intersection is in the ground plane. Bring it up. Take that point, run it through. And intersection again. Run that up. And again, back in perspective. Up. Back. There it is, ground. Now, funny thing happens here. Not funny, but a very strange phenomenon takes place here. Look what happens here. Look at the amount of space in this left-hand side of the original cube. It's pretty restrictive, right? Tighten down. Look what happens as you move back. As you go back to one, how that opens up, how that opens up, and how that opens up. What's happening is your hand is, that vanishing point or that object in the back side is opening up, and it's beginning to swing open toward the horizon line. That's really critical, especially those of us who do automobile design. Really interesting stuff, because most of us draw the same circles front and back. It doesn't happen like that. I'll show you in a few moments here if we can get to that. Notice what, again, I'm going to really make this a very critical part. That's very tight. As you go back one, opens up. Go back another one, opens up. Go back again, it opens up. If I add another cube, that thing will go right back almost to a flat line as it goes back to horizon line. That's really paramount, especially when you do architectural work, interior space work. Opening things up and making it more dramatic becomes a part of the whole process. It is really interesting how it all begins to develop the newness in your sketches and the freshness. And I'll stop here a moment. I'm following. Very good. All making sense, I think. Well, how can we clarify some things here, Valdemar? Is there anything that I've missed and going too quickly with? The SVP is an MVP. Yep, you're right. That is the real savior to proportion. Well stated there. I really like that following here, so that's good. So let me go down here to this guy right here for a second. There's a basic shell I've started. Now I'm going to go back in and begin to put some drama to this thing. Now that you've got a frame in here, let's do this. This frame is now here. There's the first cube. I've taken it back. I've gone back, in essence, I've gone back one, two, three cubes back. There it is. So now I'm going to take that shape and begin to develop a form out of it. Now let's take this thing, put a little bit of crown to this frame. Let's do this. Let's go back here. Get that line to go through. Let's put a radius up front and kick that thing back a little bit. Let's take this and kick it back a little bit. Notice I'm using, look at that distance there in perspective, that distance here. Wider, narrower, further away from me. Let's take that shape right back to vanishing point. Let's flatter it a little bit, put a little bit of sweep to it. And let's roll this thing out right into it. There it is. Let's take that line back to vanishing point, over the top, run it through, a little bit of detail. Run that line right back into vanishing point. Find this over here, at that same point up on top, admit it disappear. Let's curl that in and develop that. Now let's change the pace here. Let's get this thing to kind of do that. Let's open it up a little bit with a sweep. And there it is. And let's drop this back. So we're going to show that there's a little bit of a negative in here. Back in perspective. Cut back. Area. A little bit of this. Take that line back. Let's tighten this up a little bit. Now, using line weights to show where the form is. Take it off the page. Put a little bit of animation to it. And there's a little bit of center line here. Let's put a little bit of a detail on-off switch of some sort. Let's take this guy, tone it in. Into shadow. Open that up. Drop that through. And put a bit of shadow behind this thing. Over there. Back in perspective on the ground plane. And this again, this a little bit of a setting here. Oh, sorry about this. Get this on page. Let it fade. Notice that line goes right back in perspective to vanishing point left. There's a little thumbnail sketch based on putting that whole process put together here. Now let's do something else here. Pardon me, just a moment. Now that's a simple shape. Let's do this. Let's see what happens when we do this. Just out of curiosity, what happens if I do this? What if I take that leading edge and do this? Again, without all the other drive lines on it. I want to illustrate here the whole importance of getting those things. Just interesting how the whole thing works. Get the vanishing points off the page. I'm going to do the following here. I'm going to take this line here. Here's my leading edge. I'm going to develop a frame first. Drive that back. And then stop it right there. There it's there. I'm going to take this guy and run it back in perspective. You ready? There's my frame. Same process. Without all the information on here. Leading edge, frame right, frame left. Now let's just switch gears here. Let's kind of set this up. There's one. Let's drive it back with my perspective center. There it is. Now drive that line back. Let's get the wheelbase set. 1, 2, 3, 4 back. Let's get that all set up. Drive that line back. There's my axle. That line back, axle. Center line, center line. All right, ready? Let's cross it over. Let's just go there. Let's just go back and open this up by doing the following. There's my far side tire. I'm going to find that shape by doing the following. Here's my center line. Break that up. Break that up. Let me stop right there. Slowly building a vehicle here based on the same principles of using all the dynamics of language and things we're talking about into a vehicle study. Here's my center line. Now I'm going to come back in there and put a front end in this guy. Rotate in. Take that line back. Run that in. There it is. And back up the center line. Draw that through. Into upper. Run that right back. Into fender. Roll that out of the way. Into windscreen. And before you know it, hopefully, we've got an automobile. There it is. See it, gang? Did I go too quickly there? It's the same principle. I'm going to use a sketch to show you how to break it down in a moment here. Let's kind of get this into place. In the center line. In the graphics. Into A-pillar. Over the top. A little bit of a scoop back in through here. Rear engine. Over the center line. Into lighting graphics. across, lighting. Into shadow. Well, let's get this back on the page here. There it is. What do you think, gang? Fantasy robots. All right. I actually tried to design some fantasy robots, and Doc already helped me a lot by those kind of streams. So I really, well, that's great. Really pleased to hear that now. That's terrific. Good to know. So let me try something here. Let me do this. Let's do a little analysis here. Here we started here. We went back in perspective to this. We went back to this. Let's analyze this guy from up. There's my first cube. 1, 2, 3, 4 back. There's my cross reference. There's my leading edge here. Center line is right there. There's my other frame. I came back on top, and all I did was just drop that down. From that point there, I dropped that center line from there down to there, got the hood line, brought it through. And again, built this on top of that. Again, same process again, back in perspective, into the upper, into the rear cabin, across, back again. Notice all those boxes began to build that machine. That's what I saw when I started this whole process. I didn't see the car. I saw, pardon me, I'll bring this back here for our benefit here. I saw this. And inside that is the whole secret to success. And I think that's one of the things I want to really develop here in this stream today. In our last show on Twitch, which is a bit of a heartache, but nonetheless rejoicing in the fact we're going to YouTube. It's going to be really cool to do so. Looking forward to it. But again, the key thing for this whole stream today was, number one, to take the intimidation factor out of. Hey, hi, Brett. How are you, man? Good to see you. Can I ask you? Absolutely. Ask me what? Go right ahead. Fire away. Hey, Doc, can I ask you? Let's see, a little bit of a delay here. I guess it's coming in from Saudi Arabia. So that's a little thumbnail sketch here. A very ragged sketch, but do you see how the principles work? Hopefully, every step in that very simple, poorly done execution sketch here is governed by perspective. And then once you have that building block in place, you just carve it out of there. All right, hi, Brad. Here's a question. How can you draw things from imagination? I've been genuinely struggling with getting things from my mind onto the paper. That's an extremely sensitive question, Brad. And I think the thing I'd really suggest for you to help you there is to just begin to look at in terms of, pick an object, for example. Let's say you pick up like an iPhone, something that's very simple. How would you change that shape very simply to kind of make it yours, to give it some identity? Just interesting, for example, just making changes, radii changes, maybe it's got more crown, maybe it's got a step up on it, think, just let your imagination think through the process rather than trying to put pressure on yourself to think in terms of, well, here's what I've got to have a really powerful imagination and it's got to work or else I fail. That's false. Take something simple and modify it. Second question, it's like an imagination, a barrel full of water, and take the water from it, and all of a sudden, let it slip through your fingers. That's part of the learning process. I mean, I've done that for about 50 years of my career. It's just amazing how much, I think if I were to measure the number of gallons I've lost, it's probably be enough to fill the ocean. I would not allow that to, I'd let it slip through your fingers. That, to me, is a key statement there, Brett. That's a learning process. If you're trying and it trickles through, let it trickle through. Something's going to come out of that. It's going to be positive. I did the same thing here. I just took a chance with this shape, chance with that shape, and just put it all together. And then all of a sudden it begins to create an ensemble. Is it correct? No. Is it beautiful? No. It's a process. So I think that's what you're looking at. The imagination side. Don't put that pressure on yourself. Be very careful about the fact that when I draw something, pick a simple object. It can be something as simple as, again, an iPhone or a small little clock radio, something that's simple. Modify the shape and begin to develop an imagination from that, and you'll find that to be absolutely miraculous. That was one of the exercises Sid Mead had us go through. He would have us go through the whole idea of picking a simple shape, and in about 20 minutes time, he was asked about 50 concept sketches on variations on theme. You were just winging through it. Some of them look awful, but the point was we were generating ideas from our mind and getting past the fear of letting that whole process unfold and teach us something about the creative process. Brett, okay, so the plan is to learn to modify things that exist in order to learn. Yeah, I mean, that's well said. Look at things that exist, and that doesn't mean you copy them, doesn't mean you have to plagiarize yourself, but look at that shape and say, okay, if I were to design that thing, how would it look like? For example, if I were to design the next Ferrari 512 TR, what would that look like? Just make changes to it. Suddenly make change, something as compound as that. Or again, going back to something as simple as just taking a simple iPhone and modifying the shape to it. So it's very dramatic how the whole thing goes together. I've heard that successful design is 20% novelty and 80% familiarity. So learning to draw the real work and tweak is slightly, yeah, it's a great start. It's a good point, Anteros. That's really true. It's 20% novelty, 80%. Are you familiar with the overall, what's person or the DNA of which they're thinking about? But the 20% comes from how to modify that and make it much more manageable. And so one thing I want to cover too before we leave, have that screen here. There's one thing I didn't talk about here in this whole process about getting together. For example, in two-point perspective, we talked about platforms. That's going to come up later. And by the way, please tune in next week. We're going to start doing speed forms. It's going to be a lot of fun. Empathic speed forms. So that's part of the battle plan for next week. But there's one thing I want to make sure of. Let me start with something here. Developing a platform in two-point perspective will look like this. You come up, and back in perspective, open that line up, and then can begin to collapse this line. That's a two-point perspective platform right there. Notice how those lines collapse. Look at that. And look at that. Those lines are completely driving back to a vanishing point out here, and these guys are driving to a vanishing point out there. That's called a platform. That's what you're going to base from. Now, on top of that platform, we're going to start doing this. Now, that's what I was getting at, Brett. I took a simple shape platform, developed a form in it, and just modified the form. Maybe the next one might look like this. The next one might look like this. Real rapid little sketches. Makes sense? There it is. That's a variation on theme. That's the thing you want to work with. Start with something simple, modify it, and modify it. That's going to help you get through that whole idea of becoming extremely locked into trying to be imaginative, but just let it happen naturally. So here we go. Anybody questions there at all today, gang? I really appreciate you all of you being on board. It's been a lot of fun here today, and I hope this. Let's go back here and do a real quick review. Little thumbnail sketch based on the block system. I'm back here just for a moment, and this is the one we did a little bit of fundamental work in terms of how to develop all the language put together to create a little shape out of that, and then paying attention to the inside cut line process, and then a little series of sketches based on 2-point perspective, getting the volume set and then drive lines in place and carving the shape out of it, and down to this guy here, which is again the same process. Taking a little simple three view drawing and moving it into different shapes or different views using the same geometry that we talked about. And this is again stacking it up in terms of horizon lines, leading edge, central vanishing point, CVPs, all that stuff that's really helpful. Last but not least, the language structure of how it all begins to happen. And I think that's important too. When I put workshops on, I'm very clear about the fact that let's go in perspective. We're going to have drive lines, leading edges, we're going to have vanishing points, central vanishing points, all these elements that really make a huge difference. And then last but not least, we started the stream with here's the basic premise and rapid sketch, for example, the whole process of getting into, in this case, 2-point perspective. So I really do want to thank you for your time. I hope this has been helpful to you. Thanks very much, Antivirus. Much appreciate. Thanks to you. You make this stuff happen. And Brad, I'm glad that you hopefully got some things out of that in terms of how to get that whole idea down. Put imagination out of the way and just create something and take chances. I think the greatest, let me just say this in closing. The greatest, you know what the greatest contributor to confidence is? Conflict. The more you put yourself in conflict, the more confident you become. Take chances. If you make a mistake, it's a mistake, maybe, but is it? When you take chances, you take that chance. You might have some errors and some withdrawals here and there, but the whole idea is you've learned something from it, so it's an advantage. I make mistakes all over the place, and I'll say this too. I always put this in a workshop. I'll make this comment, but take a good look at that sketch, or sketches. There are mistakes all over the place. They're just so good you can't see them. That's the idea behind it all, really, when you come down to it. And I'm not trying to be arrogant with that. That's something, you make mistakes, but sometimes, I'll give you an example. Working on Ferrari when I was over in Europe with the gang, we made a comment. We took a piece of a paper plate and drew a little design line on it. Out of that mistake became the Ferrari 348. Interesting. You never know. So, Brad, again, going to thank him, approach and try. Yeah, give it a try, Brad. I think you'll find that to be very just simple shape, modify it as you go and see what comes up. And let those mistakes come through. That's the learning process. Last but not least, previous success is where my confidence comes from sometimes, but we'll keep that in mind. Very good, Brett. To all of you tuned in, thank you so much. And Shadow's in the studio today. I'm going to give him a standing ovation. The guy is absolutely amazing. He's typing while I'm jawboning, and I hope I have not destroyed the conversation here in any way, shape, or form. But last but not least, let me just say this in closing. To those of you who've been following me on Twitch, my sincerest, heartfelt thanks to you for doing so. But I also want to encourage you to really get out there, and we don't want to lose you at all. I think, well said, Shadow. We don't want to lose you at all. Please please switch over to YouTube. We'll be going YouTube live every Wednesday now. We'll try to keep it consistent on Wednesdays, for example. Today we had a bit of a delay because of some things we had to tune in on the website and things that Shadow was working on. Please subscribe to me on YouTube. Tell all your friends that we're going to be live there. I want to build that audience because I think we're going to make a difference, and I'm really excited about the fact that I'm grateful for all of you who've taken the time to tune in and just to hey, thanks very much. I already subscribed. That's fantastic. So much appreciated. Kind of a bittersweet day in a way for me. Grateful for YouTube, but looking for, as you said last week, the title of the stream was A New Era. This is a new era for me, all the people I'm working with, and above all else, my mission for doing this on YouTube, it's not about me. It's about what we do as a collective group to advance your cause. And again, I'll state this: if you have anything you want me to work on to help you with, drop me a note on my email address at jim@drcontrast.com. Also, please visit the website. We've got some neat things happening there. And just drop me a note about how you'd like to have it. And by the way, Antivirus and Terrace, if you're still there, please send me your email address. I misplaced it. I'm going to get something to you here sometime throughout the course of the week or next week. I think I had the bell on the wrong setting, but I fixed it. Oh, very good. So once again, gang, all the very best to you. Thanks for taking the time here today. It's been a lot of fun for me, and I'm looking forward to a new era on YouTube, and I hope you'll join me. And last but not least, tell your friends. And if they join in, they'll be delighted, and so will I. So all the best to you. Again, standing ovations to Shadow. He's right over here, taking command of the keyboard. And that guy's an absolute genius. I will tell you right now, he's an absolute genius. I'm grateful for him. He's a terrific friend and a tremendous talent. So all the best to you, gang. Thanks very much, Brett. Stay tuned. And Nemo, if you're still there, thanks for joining in, everybody. Much pleased. And always tying off with this, that's the most important part of the whole stream. Number one, never forget to dare to be great, because you are. Never forget to do that. Just you are. So thanks so much, guys. We'll see you next Wednesday. All the very best, and take care. See you on YouTube.